Bonjour everyone, I am Anne-Lise Cailliez and welcome to Parlez-Vous CEO, where we ditch the corporate talk and get real about entrepreneurship. Each week, I chat with founders and CEOs who build businesses their way, through the failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. And they bring the fire. Plus, I'll drop some golden nuggets of wisdom from my own entrepreneurial journey. This is your space to grow, learn, and evolve with a true growth mindset. Remember, success isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Now let's kick things off and get this party started. Hello, bonjour, and bonjour, hello. Welcome to another episode of Parlez-Vous CEO. My name is Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I am your host, and I am very excited to have with me Kristen Fraser. Meet Kristen. She's a licensed professional counselor who built Canton Counseling from a solo practice into a thriving multi-therapist organization in Georgia. Kristen, in your own words, and for the people who are just meeting you today, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, I started my journey as a school counselor actually into the mental health world, and was in the middle school grades for several years. Always knew that I wanted to then kind of venture out. Counseling is a great place to practice your skills initially, but it's very limited, and I kept referring my students out to the next level of care, and I wanted to be that next level. So for me, I kind of always knew that I wanted to jump into something a little bit bigger. After I had my son, I decided that I was going to start my private practice at that point and just kind of opened up a single shingle, just me in an office. But I established the name Canton Counseling right from the get-go because in my mind, I also knew that the next steps were going to be something more comprehensive, something bigger, something that could meet the needs of our community. I wanted to create a safe space where anybody in my county, my community could come get the help that they needed. So that's kind of the baby steps on what got me to where I am today.
That's amazing. And so you already had that vision to be a bigger practice. When you made the switch from working from someone to starting your own practice, what was helped you pull the trigger?
I think for me, it was kind of personal and professional. The professional landscape within the school counseling world had become very restrictive, and there were things being put into place that were taking away from the actual counseling aspect and were becoming more educational focused and administrative focused. And I think, like I said, I was just ready. I felt like I'd kind of got my feet wet. During that time, I was a single woman, so I couldn't really financially jump out into that private practice world without a steady income. So at that point in my life, transitioning into the personal decision, I had just had my son. Financially was in a place where it felt safer for me to kind of lock and load and make that financial transition into the private practice. For me, it kind of came to a head at the same time. It was kind of this sweet spot of I was ready professionally and I was ready financially, but I knew it was going to take some time. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things for folks in navigating a private practice setting is it's great flexibility, and there's a lot of great things to kind of have that can be the good side of that risk. But the hard part of the risk is it doesn't have any steady income, and it takes some time to kind of build up clientele and get that momentum. And so financially, it can be a little bit scary.
So did you feel it was one of the most challenging pieces of going from solo practitioner to running a team of therapists? It was building a patient flow.
Yeah, I would say that, probably first year, everything kind of happened for my practice pretty organically. It was after I'd been, I would say, 7 to 9 months out on my own, just building my own caseload and getting the amount of clients I felt comfortable with. I'd made some really good connections with community leaders, and got the name out there pretty quickly. And at the time, there weren't a lot of counseling practice. There were some individual therapists, but like I said, the day one when I started my website, I was the we at Canton Counseling, and my spouse at the time was like, "Well, who's the we?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a web designer, I have an accountant." So it was me, but I think getting that name was crucial early on because it developed a website that showed something that was a little bit more comprehensive. And so taking on as I became as my schedule became full, I had more confidence that I could bring in somebody. And it just so happened that somebody had crossed my path and said, "Hey, I know that you just started at a practice. I work at this other place full time, but I'm wanting to do something a couple nights a week and just kind of start into the private practice world." And I was like, "Oh, that's perfect." And so that's how the solo one became two.
I see.
And it just kind of unfolded like that over the course of time. Slow and steady was my kind of biggest mantra for myself.
And that sounds great. It sounds like it happened really organically for you. So once you started having a couple of therapists working for you, did you have to change anything in the business model, do a different type of marketing or outreach that helps you build Canton Counseling?
Yeah, I would say within the first 2 to 3 years, I managed it pretty much on my own in terms of taking calls and things like that. But I knew pretty quickly, not only because of our community in terms of what they needed, but also in terms of volume, we were going to have to get involved with insurance companies, which it seemed very overwhelming and intimidating at the time because probably like most people, just navigating your own personal insurance can be overwhelming to figure out benefits and such. So to think about doing it for other people and being on the provider side was just new territory for me and a space that I had very little understanding and knowledge about. So it was a matter of making that jump. And for us, I knew that we live in an area that's very hardy middle class, and they really utilize their medical benefits. And so knowing that mental health benefits specifically, oftentimes are going to be utilized weekly or every other week, that's a significant income. Whereas if you're going to a specialist or a doctor, you might go once every 6 months or once a year. And so you can kind of pay out of pocket for some, but to be utilizing counseling services, that becomes more of an expense. So I knew early on that that was what I was going to have to navigate for both the company growth as well as providing the service that I felt like the community could really rely on. So that was probably, I would say, the biggest growing pain in the beginning. I will say I started off the practice for myself, very technologically driven. So I was 15 years ago, utilizing electronic calendars, which was kind of new, and using a traditional EMR program. So I think starting early with an integrative technology helped me not have to do a lot of things over again because I created this initial landscape that was already kind of ahead of the curve.
Amazing. And so you said you always had a keen interest on tech. That's why you wanted to automate and use as much platforms as possible.
Was being able to have everything kind of all in one place too, whether it be merchant services as well as portals for the clients to be able to access, being able to utilize e-sign and documents online. So getting away from traditional files and things that in my mind, I knew that as I grew, I didn't want to have space for. I didn't want to have, a room full of cabinets for files and things of that nature.
Kristen, did you feel that there was at any point a big business decision that completely changed the trajectory of the practice?
Yes. And it was about 6 years in. I was leaving my office one day, and at the time I was renting. At that point, I had two other clinicians that had started. So it was me and there was three of us total, and I was leaving and I took a different way out of the office. And as I drove out the front of the office, I saw on the front door of a building, it said short sale. And it was kind of like I guess one of those like permit kind of looking things. It's kind of orange and obnoxious. And I remember getting out of the car and looking and being like, well, I wonder how much commercial real estate is. Like, I don't know. That seems a little bit out of my league. But I was like, well, I'm going to check it out. So I just started researching and YouTube University on how to purchase or look at even, getting into a short sale. And I literally, between the internet and YouTube, figured out how I could acquire an office space. And so I helped pay a friend that was out of work a couple dollars and a sub sandwich to sit down in front of the courthouse steps and watch this property to see if it was picked up by anybody, and it wasn't. And so the next morning I called the bank that was holding the loan and I said, I'd like to put in an offer. And I had a friend that was a real estate agent, and we wrote up an offer, and I went through the short sale process and purchased my first commercial property, which was a 5 office suite. And I mean, I remember coming home and being like, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to buy this property. And my friends were like, dude, you just started a practice. Like, you're going to buy commercial property? And I'm like, I know, isn't it crazy? But I'm going to do it. And I got a great deal, and it was amazing. And it was the beginning of, I think, what felt to me like a big deal. And that allowed me to have 4 more offices to fill. And so that was the time that we went from me doing all of the things and 2 therapists to probably within, I would say, 6 to 8 months of taking over the space, hiring my first admin to take in the calls and bringing on 2 more therapists. So it was, that was a big deal. So I opened another business entity, which is the commercial holding property. So they're separate, which gives me today the opportunity and space to do things differently. So it's kind of nice. I got the write-off for Canton Counseling to pay rent to me. That felt great.
That's amazing. What an amazing story. And indeed, it was a very brave and bold move, but you already had the vision, and that's really impressive that you made it happen, that you decided, this is what I want, this is making sense, I'm going to study it, and I'm just going to go for it. That's
Yeah.
really impressive.
I feel like through all of the growth at different mile markers, there's been a guttural feeling that has always led me. And it's just been it's been a nervous feeling. It's been one with trepidation, or it's not this like calm, like, okay, everything's going to be great. But there's this guttural, kind of intuitive, like it's going to work out kind of feeling for some of those bigger moments. And so, as not only I encourage myself, other women or men that I've talked to in starting their own businesses or therapists, that leaning into that intuitive kind of guttural feeling is so important. I tell my clients all the time, it's that heart head gut connection. And, it's when those things line up, you're like, okay, doesn't mean it's not risky, doesn't mean that it's not going to be challenging, but it means it's going to be okay.
That's beautiful, and that's so inspiring. And Kristen, so how do you do that while connecting with your guttural feel, like your heart and head, as you're describing, for something so big and so different from what you had done before? And also, how do you know whether it's your gut or your intuition, or if it's your fears leading you? How do you make the difference?
Uh, I think it's just time going through big decisions and knowing kind of what feels. I think, a lot of times as an entrepreneur, I'm one of those people that, like, I reel out really far, and I don't make decisions out there, but I go out there pretty big. And then I reel back in through the research and the time. And then I find where my sweet spot of decision making is. So I know not to make decisions all the way out there, but I go there to all the big places and all the kind of knee jerk reactions and thoughts and dreams, but I know not to make decisions out there. So I think for me, it's knowing how to balance the risk worth versus the resources and the education, and knowing, if I don't know it, then finding out who can help me. So being resourceful has been key. Leaning into other folks. I started off doing a consultation group very early on where I was working with, going and paying for a group to go with other clinicians that were wanting to start a practice. And that was crucial for me, to have that kind of tribe of other people that were in it, just like me, kind of scratching and clawing through and being able to, have those conversations on like, well, what are you guys doing? And I've been really fortunate that there's been a group of 4 women that we have stayed together for 11 years. And we are more sisters from other misters than we are colleagues at this point because we've gone through so many things together. But that tribe of other professionals it's not even quantitative in terms of a financial benefit. So I think, it's having a good tribe around you, taking time, not making decisions with knee-jerk and emotional decision making, and giving yourself the opportunity to do the research. I think that helped with a lot of the confidence in my decision making.
Amazing. And this is really amazing insights, because that was my next question is, how do you make such a big decision? Who do you talk to? Your partner, your friends, your mentors? Do you have a board? But that makes a whole lot of sense if you have peers and people doing in the similar space and that you really trust and with whom you can brainstorm, exchange ideas. I think that can really make such a big difference. Also, because as an entrepreneur, as a founder, the road can get lonely sometimes and the ups and downs are really hard. It took me about 10 years to find my community of other marketing agencies. And I always missed that because I didn't have a co-founder. And your team and staff is not exactly the same for those big decisions. And if you don't have a board, it can get tricky. So I absolutely agree with you. Finding your tribe is essential. And also, yeah, can definitely help support in these big pivotal
Yeah.
moments with the business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the hardest part is that at the end of the day, the decision solely falls on your own responsibilities, but being able to, even in those moments, have other people kind of sift through some of that decision making and be like, no, I think it sounds like a good idea. Or even to play the devil's advocate of like, oh God, I don't really, are you really thinking about doing that? Like, are you sure? And even having to like combat some of that hesitation or resistance, it either worked to my benefit in the sense that it made me second guess something or do more research, or it empowered me that I was making the right decision because I could come back with something that was of value that changed their mind and like, oh, I didn't even think about that, or oh, now that you've said that, that really makes sense. So I think at the end, when you're making decisions by yourself, you have to change that landscape because you can't do it. You just can't. It's too much.
Did you ever imagine growing up that this is what your career would look like, that you have a business, that you would be helping people the way you're helping people?
Well, my first degree when I started at the University of Georgia was international business with a minor in Spanish. So, no. I mean, I think that I was always somebody that has been a nurturer. I was probably growing up somebody that was a helper more than I was a taker. I enjoyed friends and relationships mean a lot to me. So I know that about my heart and my kind of who I am as a person. I think that the entrepreneur part of me, as I defined who I am and went through college and kind of thought about what I really wanted to be when I grew up, I knew I didn't see myself in a traditional corporate setting working for somebody for 20, 30 years. I knew that in my kind of heart of hearts. I think that as I got into life and navigated the things that meant the most to me through my life, I think like many therapists and counselors or people that are in the helping profession, they've gone through something personally themselves. And, there was a time in my life during the 15, 16, 17-year time span where life got really hard. And it was a therapist that really helped me navigate a lot of yuck and change the trajectory of what I felt like I was capable of. And so I think that, when you jump out into the world as a 20-year-old kid, you think about what you want to be that looks flashy and makes a lot of money and is going to be fun. And then I think in my mind, I was going to make money and travel. And that was all I cared about. And, you get into the academia of that and you're like, oh my God, business is terrible. I hate these classes. And so then, you start to kind of wiggle into like, okay, well, really, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? And so I think that the natural progression of, teaching was where I went first. And then through teaching, I went and got my graduate degree as a school counselor. And I wanted to gravitate towards the middle schoolers that just had it hard, middle schools, those sixth, seventh, and eighth grade for the majority of kids it's a hard going time. So I think that that's where, as I kind of unfolded what professional landscape, it just kind of led me there. So yeah, I don't feel like I went on a segue on you, but that's the long answer to the short question.
So you work with everyone from preteens to adults and couples. How do you shift your approach across those different moments in people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially now being in it for as long as I have, it kind of comes far more natural. I think that, you know, my approaches therapeutically oftentimes are different because, when you're dealing with couples, I pull a lot from my Gottman training. And so, utilizing kind of that neutrality and that space of navigating a couple is totally different than any individual session. So my individual sessions tend to, I can just pick up where I left off with those clients and I'm meeting them where they are. That's so whether it's a preteen that's talking about, struggling with school or friends or, family stuff to somebody that is, in their 50s and 60s navigating a transition in their life, or mood disorders, things of that nature, just meeting the clients where they are. That's couples therapy. And I also do EMDR therapy, which is more trauma related. So when you're working with the modalities of Gottman or you're utilizing the EMDR kind of components, those are so vastly different in terms of the actual therapeutic approach. So those kind of just line into their own lanes, whereas I feel like traditional talk therapy, you're just kind of going where the client needs to go and bringing them back to kind of the ultimate goals of what they want to see out of counseling.
Kristen, what do you find the most interesting and the most challenging about couple therapy?
That it's couples. That's the most challenging. I mean, I think you're just, you're outnumbered. You're constantly coming at things from, this duality and perspectives. You've got each of the clients. I always say it's a little bit of like a 3-ring circus. You've got each of them and their individual stuff that they're bringing to the session or to the table. And then you've got the systemic relationship and all that has kind of transpired over the course of time. So I think it's just the dynamics. And then, to be a really good therapist in those couple sessions, it's constantly monitoring your neutrality, right? And I think that that's probably one of the hardest things that you don't have to kind of take conscientious into any other session. Whereas in a couple session, I know for me, I'm constantly monitoring my intentionality with, have I given both people the same space to talk? Am I ensuring that if I'm cutting off one person because the other person's speaking and holding them, am I doing the same to the other person? Am I aligning with somebody, or how, when the hot seats maybe going to be on somebody, do I make it not so hot so that it seems like there's 2 against 1? Right. So I think the structure is just more challenging because you're not just doing therapy, you're constantly assessing the climate of the room.
Interesting. So do you have the feeling that couple therapy sessions are a bit more draining?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think again, it's because of just the natural complexity. And, I mean, I would love to say that, couples come in to do the work that maintains the relationship, but we know that that's a very small part of the population. Usually when they're coming in, like, it's hit the fan, so to say. Right? Like they're in some level of high conflict. There is a lot of distress in the relationship. There's intensity. whenever you're dealing with that, that's always its own kind of dynamic. And so to have two people kind of navigating a certain intensity, and it's I do a lot of psychoeducation. I feel like within the first kind of 5 sessions of just, the normal reactionary, and, like Gottman talks about the four horsemen of, like if I hear something that's I'm going to be, or if I hear something that's criticizing, I'm going to be defensive, and that's a natural response. So you're doing just a lot of kind of teaching, right? So they can start to identify the things that they're doing that are creating these kind of negative traps. So yes, I do find that they are far more draining. And that's where I like to meet the balance of seeing some of the kids because it seems lighter, or navigating, I have had clients that have been with me for years, and they come in and out when life gets intense, or just for maintenance and accountability. So it's nice to have a little bit of all of that on your calendar. Know how somebody could just see couples, but to each their own. I think that's the beautiful part about the counseling world is there's enough out there that people need help. And so you can kind of do what feels the most authentic to and passionate about what you kind of connect with.
Absolutely. And Kristen, what called you to focus specifically on helping people going through conflict and difficult experiences?
Probably my own pull from life experiences. Like I said, when I was 15, my parents went through a big divorce, and there was a lot of transitions, and being kind of the older of two younger siblings. There's three of us total. I had to take on a very parental role. And I wasn't this like kid at 15. I lived in an environment which, for my family, we did financially well, and I hadn't had a whole lot of trials and tribulations. So I just didn't have a skill set on how to deal with really tough times. And so I think being able to kind of go through and navigating depression and anxiety, and kind of figuring out what that looked like for me. Like I said earlier, I feel like it was being able to go back to the person that helped me navigate it and normalize it, and recognize that you just have to put one foot in front of the next. And she didn't change anything for me. My situation was still difficult and challenging, and it still sucked. But being able to know I was going to get through it, and that I had a place that I could go that wasn't my parents or wasn't my friends, and I could say all the things that I needed to say, and I wasn't going to get in trouble, and there was just that safety. And it was life-changing. I don't know if I hadn't navigated, that counseling experience, I don't know if I'd be here today. It was definitely life-changing and impactful, because I knew that at that young age, I was feeling an overwhelming feeling that I didn't think I could handle.
Do you feel, Kristen, that each therapist should have a therapist?
I do. And, I think that it's something that I'm very transparent with my clinicians in the practice, that, that whether it through be consultation or supervision, that I've navigated, and open, honest conversations about, that I've seen counselors, and that I've encouraged them at different times in their own personal journeys where, your outside life gets heavy too. And we can show up and put on, whatever we need to, or shut down whatever we need to, the noise, to be present in our counseling sessions. But we're still human, right? And we're still going to go through it. So I do encourage therapists to have their own space to utilize. And it's not that we have to utilize it all the time, but when life gets extra heavy, it's kind of being able to ensure that we too have a place to put our cup down, right? That we can put it down, let somebody else help us fill it back up, and then kind of move forward. So yeah, I'm a big advocate and utilize my own therapist as well.
And what do you think is a risk for a therapist to not do therapy himself or herself? Or is the risk more inwards? So maybe the risk of burnout, or the risk of burnout, or is it potentially challenging the therapeutic experience they are providing?
Well, I think there's always a benefit to being on the other side of the couch and knowing what it feels like, and being able to kind of understand. One of the things that when I was navigating the EMDR therapy, I had a couple clients that were had really complex trauma cases, and I got to the point where after several years of working with them, I just knew that they couldn't get the trauma out of their body, and so I was doing some research about EMDR, and my therapist, who I was working with personally, had mentioned that she was EMDR certified. So I was like, I would really like to utilize that for some of these negative, narratives that I know that I get stuck in, and I would love to go through the process. And that was really helpful for me to know what the client would be then experiencing and the awkwardnesses that it brought up, or the challenges, cognitive stuckness, and to be able to kind of know what that process felt like, because it is a very different process. And, there's a bit of a sales pitch that has to go into it to help people understand why they would be doing something so different than a talk therapy. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the burnout is huge because, again, we can only handle so much and we're constantly taking things on. So, the importance of self care is crucial. And I do feel like having our own support system or therapeutic alliance personally helps with that. But I also think that, it gives us the opportunity to know what it feels like when we're asking somebody to do something really difficult. And I constantly know for myself that, I'll get out of a counseling session that I've said something to one of my clients. And in my own mind, I'm like, oh, well, that was really good advice to give them. Are we going to do that ourselves? It's that integrity voice of like, oh, that was such good advice you gave them. Are we going to do it too now? Like, no, of course we're not. We are much better at giving other people advice and telling them how to do hard things. We don't do that ourselves.
Absolutely. And Kristen, what is the thing that you love the most about your career and your business?
I love the duality of entrepreneurship and running the business and the clinical part of being a support for clients. Like, I don't think I could do one without the other. It just makes my heart and my brain happy. I loved growing the business and establishing it and getting it to where it was. But I love the stories. It is such an honor that people come in and trust me with their heart or the things that are the most intimate, most difficult. And so it feels like such a gift that people let me into their lives and trust that I can help them. So to me, there's nothing that can replace having that honor and having someone trust you with something that's so incredibly difficult and challenging. And then on the other side is being able to kind of utilize the business part. It gives me that outlet where I can kind of just hit that rhythm. So that for me has been kind of, I feel like what's helped me in terms of longevity is that counterbalance.
I love it. This is so inspiring that you found that way to do something businessy, stimulating, and at the same time helping people. I think this is sometimes a hard combo to achieve. So I can see how that must feel fulfilling. And Kristen, if you had to give your 20-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I always go back to, if I knew then what I know now. And it's that I'm stronger and smarter than I give myself credit for sometimes. And that to trust myself. I think that it's hard, when we think of our own self-esteem, our own self-worth, our own self-value, being able to really lean into our strengths and trust them can be really difficult. I think I sit in a much stronger place now. So I think what I would tell myself is slow and steady, just one foot in front of the next. Like, just keep going.
And what's new for the business for the next year? And where can people find you, Kristen?
So this past year was a big transition. I had a clinician that has been with the practice for a long time. She came to me as a student, went through her associate level clinician, and is now fully licensed and has been fully licensed for a couple years. And we just had some casual conversation at a conference a couple years ago, and she was asking me, well, what's your exit plan? What do you want what do you see for Canton Counseling? And I was like, well, my son's going to be graduating in a couple years. I would like to kind of get out of the business part. And so she kind of planted the seed of, well, when you're ready, give me first dibs. And that was a little bit of a seed of like, okay, so we had some more conversations this past year. And I've actually transitioned the majority ownership to her as of last month. So I'm still involved and still things are going to be the same, doing the kind of clinical director role while she's kind of learning the business. But yeah, so this is a little bit of the passing of the torch, so to say. Uh, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, we get into business because we want to work for ourselves and we want the flexibility and the opportunities that come with entrepreneurship. But I know for me, it wasn't until I went to an SBA, a small business administration that Kennesaw University has, a local university here that has some classes. And one of the things they talked about, and this was probably about 5 years ago, they were like, okay, well, what's your exit plan? And I was like, exit plan? I don't know. You just work forever, don't you? And so I think that was one of the first times where I was like, wow, I can exit. And so I talked to another therapist that had sold her practice. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I kind of want to go out like Seinfeld. I want to go out when it's on top. I don't want to be like like scraping pieces together. So yeah, it just seemed like the right fit. The good news is the business is large. We have now 22 clinicians and an admin staff of 3. And so we do a lot of really, really great work, but there's a big responsibility that comes with that. I think after 15, 16 years of a lot of sweat equity, it felt right to pass the torch to somebody that had the enthusiasm. And, I had talked with another lady in the Atlanta area that had sold her practice and, said, what are the benefits of selling to somebody that's, more kind of smaller, scale versus some of the big boxes that when you have a practice that does well, oftentimes you get these emails and interests in other companies that want to buy you out. And those are always appealing because they're big numbers. And my practice is my family. They're amazing clinicians, people that I adore, that I've worked with. I have one clinician that started with me that has been with me for 15 years. So I needed to take care of them first. And so it only felt natural to give it to somebody that was going to have the same fervor and the same passion and the same delicate hand. So yeah, it's been interesting in terms of making that transition. I don't know if I would have told you when I started that it would be this big, and I would have never assumed that I would be looking at kind of a semi-retirement at this place, but it feels right. And I'm going to still stay in the clinical world for a while. That's been the landscape, and it's been interesting.
That's amazing. What a great story. Also, really nice to hear that side of things when you're ready to pass on the torch, you said, because you studied a business, but doesn't mean that you always wanted to be a business owner forever. That's really not what you got in for. So, and the way you're doing it in such integrity and aligning with your values and picking a partner that you already know and like, I think that's really profound. I love what you've been doing. And where can
Thank
people
you.
find you, Kristen?
So our website is cantoncounseling.com. That's probably the easiest and best place to find information about the counseling practice. It's a very informational site. It has all of the therapists listed and their bios, so you can read a little bit about who might be the right fit. They can reach me specifically at Kristen, Kristen, at cantoncounseling.com. I do some business consultation. So if anybody is wanting to have further conversations about how to start a business, how to sell a business, what does that look like? I think it's important again to kind of pass it along, all of that information. So yeah, our website's probably the quickest and easiest place to find all of the information that they would need.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on today's episode, Kristen. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for the invite. It's been a great time.
Amazing. And that wraps up today's episode. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I can't wait to see you again next week. Thanks for listening to Parlez-Vous CEO today. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. It helps us keep going. And connect with us on Instagram at Parlez-Vous CEO. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I know some days are harder than others. On those tough days, think back to why you started. What you're doing today matters, even when you can't see the results yet. Ideas are great, but it's what you do with them that counts. Find everything we talked about today at parlezvousceo.com. See you next week, and you've got this.